going to be speaking to you on the ancient technique of profections. And before I get started and before I explain a little bit about my work, I'd like to take a little quick poll. I'm going to make a statement, and I want to see by a show of hands how many people would agree with this statement. And the statement is that astrology establishes a link between the inner and the outer, and between the upper and the lower worlds. How many would agree with that statement? Quite a number, almost all of you. And they say, astrologers never agree on anything. But now, when I started my work, I came into astrology from the psychological angle. I had an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I became interested in astrology because of what it had to say about the inner workings of people and about the psyche. And I studied with Glenn Perry. I read all the literature like a lot of you have, the psychological, the mythological, the really intuitive approaches, the spiritual approaches, and that's what really interested me at the time. And I realized that the modern psychological approaches and modern approaches in general were really good at tapping into the inner dimensions, what Rob was talking about, that inner workings. It's a type of astrology that taps into the poetry of life. And these modern techniques are really good at getting at the symbolic content of astrology. They're good at painting a picture, a lot like poetry. Imagery is really pertinent to the modern approaches, and they're really good at painting an image of these symbols, and we can connect to those symbols through that imagery. And I really love that. And I realized that approach was vocabulary driven. And then my life kind of took a different turn, and I started Kepler College. And through Kepler College, I became exposed to all the wonderful history of astrology and ancient techniques. And it was like doing a 180, because now the approach is completely different. It was coming at astrology from a completely different angle. It was no longer about the psyche or the inner workings of man. It was about man's life, about his outward I hate the word manifestation. I'll use it because there's not a better one right now. The outward participation, that's better. Participation in this realm of form, as Rob was talking about. And I realized, I came to an existential crisis. I basically thought, okay, what am I? Am I a psychological astrologer? Am I a traditional astrologer? Am I going to work with clients because I'm interested in their healing? I'm interested in the meaning of life. I'm interested in helping them get through rough emotional difficulties, or am I in astrology to help people with the practical aspects of life? And I went through this, dilemma, this existential dilemma, and I thought, how stupid! It's not a choice here. These are two approaches tapping into this hermetic dictum. They're tapping into this dictum from completely different angles. And the key is not to choose one or the other. The key is to integrate them, is to understand that link. That little link between these two approaches is really the crux of the matter. It's not about, what is inner, what is outer, and what's more important, and my techniques are more important than everybody else's. It's not about that. If we're true, if we all here, believe that astrology is about this link, this fundamental link between these two worlds, then we have to understand how that link operates. How does my inner psyche dynamic affect, manifest, or participate in this outer world that I'm living in? So the best way I found to get at this was in looking at astrology as a language. And so my whole approach and all the research that I've done and everything I'm going to present to you now is basically rooted in this working model of astrology as a language. And it's astrology as a language, not just as the content of that language. In other words, not just as the vocabulary, but because we modern astrologers are really good at that. We've got that pretty much figured out, but we're not so good at the syntax. How did these words, how did this dictionary of words how do we unfold that into syntax, into a grammar that we can understand more concretely and understand that link between what's on the inside and how it is brought about through this participation on the outside. So all of my work is basically about this link and understanding this language, understanding what Rob was talking about, this negotiating that we do, negotiating a language that essentially is astrology. Okay, so that's my work. And my work is primarily, when I say my work is really empirical, I don't mean that it's statistical. I mean that it's phenomenological. And what I mean by that is that I take the charts, I take these events that are happening, these outer world events, and I try to reconstruct or reverse engineer, if you will, the first principles out of that data, and come up it's not so important to me to come up with what's happening in the life, how do these symbols reflect that event, that's not as important to me, but how do these symbols reflect the language of astrology, how do these symbols reflect principles that I can use and be consistent about in deciphering this language. Okay, so, okay, now I'm going to show you, my purpose here today is not to recreate the Hellenistic use of perfections. I'm not interested in that. There are people doing it far better than me, some of which are here. And what I want to do is use perfections as a vehicle to illustrate this language that I've been working on. And this is a technique that is very old. It's in almost all of the Hellenistic, in all of the Hellenistic sources. And the word perfection shouldn't be confused with perfection. That's a word that's used in medieval literature to indicate the coming together of an aspect between two planets or more. And the perfections were recorded in the earliest Hellenistic sources, and I was talking to somebody already out there in the audience. Some of the authors who've mentioned this, all of these are Hellenistic authors. Vedius Valens is one of the sources, Dorotheus of Sidon, Paulus Alexandrinus, and Hephaestion of Thebes. And all of these authors use and speak about perfections and their use. Now, what are they? Perfections are basically this, very simply. It's a form of directing the chart. You've all heard of solar arc directions, where you move a planet a degree per year. In perfections, you move everything 30 degrees per year. Now, there are several, and this becomes a Time Lord method. And so the ruler of the sign of the perfected ascendant becomes the year lord. Now, there are several different time lords associated with perfections. There are annual lords, which is the one that I'm going to show you today. There are monthly lords, and there are day lords, and there are even hourly lords. They go down to, and conceivably you can take this to the level of minutes if you wanted to. We don't have time to go into all that, but I am going to show you the annual perfections, and I'm going to show you how I work with them and how just very excellent they are. Oops. Now, so there are a few concepts that I have to explain to you that are really crucial in understanding the way I work the system. One of the most important concepts, actually, there are a lot of important concepts. This is a really helpful concept. Is the Hellenistic literature makes reference to the life sort of as a maritime metaphor, in the sense that it equates the life with the journey. So you are on a ship, and you're traveling on this ship through your life. And on this journey, the scenery you're seeing is changing, and there's weather that's changing, and there are all these things that are happening just as if you're on a journey that you're experiencing. And the words that are used to describe this journey all go back to ships. And the place where you steer the ship is known as the helm. That's the ascendant. So the ascendant is called the horoskopos in Greek. And it's a word that means hour marker. And it's a really important concept to have of the ascendant as the hour marker, because it comes up consistently as one of the most important things for timing methods. And so all timing essentially goes back to the ascendant and is derived from the ascendant. So it's not just the marker of your birth, the marker of the time when you came into this life, when you entered into that ship and began your journey. It's also a timer in all these other techniques and all the other different charts that you can generate. The angles of the chart are called kentrons, and that word relates to this idea of pivots. And the pivots are, if you can imagine a hinge that sways back and forth, they're important because they're very dynamic points. And because they're dynamic points, they relate to intensity of action. So the angles of the chart are very crucial in timing events because they indicate to you when really important things are going to happen. Almost everything important in your life is going to be tied to these angles. Now, we come to a problem in astrology, or at least something that I think is a huge problem in astrology. And this is the idea that astrologers love to collect techniques. We have our progressions, we have tertiaries, primaries, we have perfections, there's a dizzying array of time lords, and all that information, and we love it, we collect it all because we want to use it all, and we know that it works because we've seen it in charts and we know it all works. But we don't really look at these different charts and ask ourselves, what does this chart say that this chart doesn't say in terms of this particular event? What does a solar return chart tell me? What is its function that a perfected chart doesn't tell me in terms of this event? If I have this major event in my life, is it going to show up in all these different charts? If so, which ones? Is it not going to show up in certain charts? Why not? What are the functions of these charts? We know the language, we know the vocabulary, but we don't know the function of these charts. And I have this sort of policy that I don't work with any charts unless I understand its function. And most of my research with the Profections and these timing techniques that I'm going to show you has been not only to understand the syntax of the language, but to understand the function of these charts. I want to be able to know if I see an event in my life that's really life-changing. I want to know, what chart will I see that event, where will I see this event reflected in terms of charts? Will I see it in all of them? Okay, now, this is a very hairy question, as you all know. It's a huge problem. Now, I've only looked at the charts that I'm going to show you and the solar return chart. I've worked with primarily 4 charts: the natal chart, the solar return chart, the perfected chart, and the transits. And these were all used as a whole piece in the Hellenistic literature, but they don't actually tell you how. They don't answer this question I've been asking. They don't tell you how these different charts interrelate with each other. I am going to propose something. Now, the ones that I've worked with the most are the solar return and the perfected chart. And I've worked with those empirically, working backwards from the charts. I simply put up these events that I work with consistently, put them side by side in the perfected chart and the solar return charts, and started looking at them and trying to come up with a pattern of how these events are different. What are they telling me? What is one showing me that another one is not showing me? And I started seeing a difference in the perfected chart, between the perfected chart and the solar return chart primarily. Now, I was playing around with these differences, and I put a nice little scheme up, and this, of course, is all speculative. Whenever there are little theoretical schemes that work nicely like this, I always get a little suspicious, because it's easy to make these things fit. And I will tell you that only two of these I've actually, the solar return and the perfections, I can actually say I think it's happening this way. The other ones I'm speculating about. And this goes back to the 4 causes that Aristotle speaks of, that Rob is speaking about. And I'm taking this in a completely different direction than Rob was looking at it. And what I'm proposing for the perfected chart is this. Well, actually, let's start with the solar return chart. What I'm proposing for the solar return chart is that the solar return chart is fundamentally showing you some change, because all of the causes that Aristotle speaks of relate to change and the way change happens. And the solar return chart, I think, fundamentally relates to the way that the formal change comes about. And I, connect the formal cause that Rob was talking about. At one level, the formal cause is connected to all of astrology. All of astrology is ultimately connected to a formal causal expression. But in working more specifically, I think the formal causes are very much connected to the planetary return charts, because the planets are connected to the forms. And when I get into the syntax, we'll get into a little bit more of this. But I think the solar return chart is saying, by looking at these differences in events, I noticed that all the solar return events that were showing up in these charts, and you can only do this, as Rob said, if your grammar and your syntax is consistent. You can't do it if all you have is vocabulary. You need a consistent process. You need a traditional approach. And the traditional approaches get closer at coming to the syntax. They don't get, I don't think they get completely there, but they get close. And I'm taking it another step further. So these return charts, especially the solar return chart, are speaking about these forms, change that comes about to these formal aspects of change. And the solar return in particular relates to this intrinsic essence of the sun. And the essence of the sun connects with, I call it the executive decision report chart, because it's connected to volition. The sun is connected to volition, decision, and your ability to decide things. You have all of these choices, you have all of these things happening in your life, and you have to make a choice. You have to decide what you're going to do. That is essentially changes that come about through the solar return chart are shown in that way. The perfected chart is completely different. The perfected chart is not about volition. Think about it. The perfected chart evolves because the topography of the chart evolves. The houses are evolving. They're unfolding through this directed ascendant. So it's almost like you're going through life and you're seeing, in this ship, and you're seeing the surroundings around you are changing. Now it's, sunny. Now it's a landscape that's barren. Now it's a landscape that's lush and verdant. So the topography is changing. And so as the perfected chart evolves, the topography of your life changes. So, and when I mean topography, I'm talking about topos is the Greek word for house. It's the Greek word for place. Topography has to do with place. And it has to do with the places of your life, the matter of your life. So as your topography changes, it's reflected in the perfected chart. That's different from changes that come about through volition. Does all that make sense? Okay. So you're going to see this in the examples. Okay. So let's start with some basic syntax. Let's start with the houses. Now, I am proposing this. I am proposing that the houses have everything to do with the matter of life. They have to do with the sense of place. And they have to do with the actual material of your life. So if I'm talking about, when you say, talk to me about the matter of your marriage. That marriage has a substance to it. It has a shape to it. So the houses represent the matter of life, and they show the people, places, things, and constructs of our syntax. So, for example, if we're talking about the 12th house, that we'd be talking about secrets or locked up people or things. We could be talking about hidden or removed places or people. We could be talking about pregnancy, which is also an unseen, a removed and unseen thing, something that's behind a veil. It comes up a lot in the 12th house when it's connected to the 5th. And I'll show you overlays in which this can happen. The internet comes up when the 12th is connected to the 3rd house. So this notion, and in the Vedic tradition, for all the Vedic astrologers, you know that the 12th house connects to foreign lands. And I always thought that was weird because, well, we have a 9th house. Why do we need a 12th house connected to foreign lands? Well, in actually running the charts, I saw it coming up with foreign lands. And it's not so much the sense that you are expanding your horizons by being in a foreign land. It's the notion that someone is far away, removed in a foreign place, and you're here, and they're behind a veil. So, this idea of things. Grammatically, the houses are read as the objects of our phrases. They're read as the indirect objects of a verb or object, of a verb-object phrase. And we'll go, I'll show you examples. Now, I'm going to be running charts using equal houses, and I don't want to get into a whole thing about houses here, but there's no time. But in order to do perfections, you need a house system that does not do intersections. So you can use whole sign houses will work fine. Equal houses will work well if you do them as well. If you read them as a sign, whole sign house relationship. And I'll show you how this is. But for example, if you have 16 degrees of Capricorn on the second house cusp, and Venus is in the first house in Capricorn, so there's through that sign connects the first and the second house. So you may have Venus, which has to do with acquisitions. You may have acquisitions of valuables for the home. The valuables in the home are connected through that sign and through that planet. So there's a 1-2 combination there. Okay, now the planets. Basic syntax for the planets. The planets, to me, are, now, I actually didn't mention this, but I was meaning to mention this. Rongham wrote this beautiful article on the notion of matter and form, and it's actually in this issue of the NCGR journal. And if you haven't seen it, it's really important to understand the distinction between matter and form.
Also on the website.
Also on the website. It's really important to this, to the way I work the chart. Now, he takes it a little bit differently, but you'll see that this distinction between matter and form is very, very important in understanding the chart in this way. So, if the houses are the matter, the planets are the form. Okay? The planets, think of a sculptor who's sculpting clay. Okay? The clay is the matter. The sculptor is not the form. The act of sculpting is the form. The sculptor is matter that embodies form. Okay, so matter can embody form. And the sculptor, in that act of sculpting, the act of sculpting is the form. And the planets are connected to movement. In my opinion, form is connected to movement. So I am proposing that the form given to matter is given by the planets, no matter where they are. And this is because they move, they are in these constructs, these syntactical constructs that I'm proposing. Because they move, they're always expressed as verb forms. So for Jupiter, we might say something like revealing the truth about something, or opening. I think it's Al Morrison who used to call Jupiter the great door opener. I think he's some expression like that, and I think that's great for Jupiter. So the one who opens the door, that action is the action of Jupiter, the one who provides aid to something. So this notion of doing something is connected to the planets. Now, when a planet occupies a house, an action or form is given or received by some object or matter. So we have this idea of form acting on matter, and this idea of a verb acting on some object. Just like the sculptor is a form being embodied onto the matter. Now, so Jupiter in the 11th would be like providing aid to an affiliation, to a friend, or to a group, or to an association. Now, the planet as domicile lord of a house. You don't know how long I worked on this. Like 2 years I worked on this. I went back and forth. This gave me so much trouble. And finally, I came to a position on this. And I think that the planet as domicile lord of a house indicates the form by which the things of that house are given to the native. Okay? So this idea a planet as the giver of something, okay, is connected to a planet when it rules a house. So the planet has this relationship to this house where it can give the things of that house to you. And it does that through its action. And it does that through its action. It could be in some other house, or it could be even in that same house. So it's giving something to you. So Jupiter ruling the 8th, located in the 11th, would be something like maybe providing aid to an affiliation, like we said, Jupiter in the 11th, gives the native other people's assets. Okay, so it gives the 8th house, an object of the 8th house. And when I say object, I mean that in the grammatical sense, not in the literal material sense. It could be an abstract object. In this case, it's not, but it could be. Okay, now, the 4 major dignities and abilities. I did a talk at Esau on these, and I want to focus on just four of these, because these are really important in the work that I'm going to show you. Now, we're used to thinking of the dignities as having, a planet having some kind of relationship to a planet in another sign, means that that planet has some kind of effect on another planet. Okay? I'm asking you to look at it a little differently. I'm asking you to think the planet doesn't have an effect on the other planet. The planet has an effect on the house where the other planet is. Actually, the planet has a relationship to the whole sign, okay? And that whole sign is on a house. So that planet has an effect on the matter of the house that has the sign that it rules. Now, so in the case of the domicile lord, which is our first major dignity, as I said, the planet gives the objects of the houses it rules. Okay? So the relationship to that rulership is one of giving those objects where that sign is, where that it rules. The detriment lord is the exact opposite. It takes away or diminishes the objects of the houses that it rules. It doesn't do anything to the planets. It only does something to the planets indirectly as a byproduct of having an effect on the objects of that house. The exaltation lord, it uplifts or exalts the objects of the house that it rules. The fall lord, it brings down, depresses the objects of the house that it rules. Now, this looks nice and tidy, but it took me a long time to come up with this because I was working from the actual events. I was not working from what I know about the dignities. I was working from the actual events backwards, trying to reconstruct these principles. And I want to share something with you that just made my day. I was cooking, and my husband and I had this thing where when I cook, he reads from a book out loud, because it saves on time. and he's a reader too, so it works out well. And I picked up this book, The History of God. I don't know if anybody has read this. This is a great book. If you're interested in theology and the history of concepts about God. And he's reading the chapter on Islam. And he's reading Karen Armstrong, the author, is talking about the 99 attributes of God in the Quran. And she's listing them, and then she says at one point, yet frequently, she's going through all the attributes, she says, yet frequently the divine names seem to cancel each other out. Thus God is Al-Kabir, he who takes away. He's Al-Basit, he who gives abundantly. He is Al-Kafid, he who brings low. And he is Al-Rafiq, he who exalts. This is a literal quote. These are not the words that I'm interjecting. This is actually in the Quran, a translation of what's in the Quran. And I thought, well, that made my day. Because, that's exactly what's coming out in these charts. Now, the other attributes would be interesting to investigate and see if they have some relationship with other rulerships or even with something else on the chart. I don't know. It's a humongous can of worms. And it's, and especially when you're trying to interrelate these 4 different charts. So I work with the natal chart, and I read that as a final outcome of these changes. This is what your life is tending towards. It's moving towards this destination. So the events that happen in their relationship to the natal chart are one step to get you towards this destination. The perfected chart has to do with this changing topography when these events change. The solar return chart, which we're not going to cover because there isn't enough time, but it has to do with these changes that come about through volition, through will. So, it rains. Oh, okay, let me add the transits. The transits to the natal have to do with actions that directly trigger all these other changes that come about as a result. So the transits are really triggers. So, for example, it rains, okay? That's transit. It gets you wet, okay? That's a change in topography. You decide to open your umbrella. That's the solar return, okay? This is how one event reflects. You can get these different things showing up through these different charts, okay? So the four main lords of the sign of the perfected ascendant become activated as annual time lords. It's not just, the Hellenistic literature goes in great detail about the domicile lord, the ruler of this sign, but it doesn't spend too much time on the other four. And the other four are really important. They're actually, and this is why timing was such a bitch, because I was seeing all these events showing up in transits that, the Hellenistic literature says, oh, it should be the ascendant lord. It wasn't the ascendant lord, but it was one of these other four lords. So there's more to it, to the picture, than the literature is speaking about. These four main lords of the sign of the solar return ascendant become activated as annual time lords from this other dimension, from this other perspective of will, okay? The transits of these time lords to the natal chart signal significant events when certain conditions apply. Now, these certain conditions apply is very vague, and I do that deliberately because this is a huge, huge thing that is still being untangled. I'm going to show you a piece of it, but there are more pieces of it. And, eventually I'll be writing all this up, but these other pieces are also, I've also seen and are also coming out in this literature, but A, we don't have time to cover all of it, and B, I'm still collecting data and trying to make sure that that's what's happening. I want to make sure these principles are consistent. So I'm going to show you one that I have noticed that's very, very interesting. So we'll work on that now. Okay, so in the images, you know what? I don't think I request this.
I'll put somebody in for it.
Okay. Is this the first one? Okay. Yeah, this is the first one. Now, I use celebrity charts, but because when I work with these methods, I'm usually presenting them and I want to say the events for the end, and I want to sort of build up to that. But today I'm doing something a little differently. I don't want to show you, I don't want you to see or delineate the events. I'm going to tell you what the events are. What I want you to see is the grammar. And I want you to see how this works, how this all interrelates. Now, and because I'm doing that, because I want you to see the grammar and not the events, and I have to work with a chart that I know really well because I have to reverse engineer these principles. So I have to work with a chart I know to get the principles. Once I get the principles, then I can apply them to charts I don't know, and that will be its testing. But because I want to present the principles to you, I want to show you my sort of research process. And so I'm going to use my chart as an example. And this is a chart for 1995. And what's on the inside, what's on the inside here, so you can see this better. This is my natal chart on the inside. This is the perfected chart on the outside. Now, I actually designed these wheels on SolarFire to make them do what I needed to do. So I had to redesign the page. But one of the things that SolarFire will do these annual perfections, but it won't do this house layover that I have here unless you redesign the pages. So these numbers on the outside are numberings, are the number of the houses counting from this ascendant. So you don't want the number of the houses counting from your natal ascendant. You want the number of the houses counted from this ascendant. So I had to redesign the page and it looks like this. Now, What the two events that happened on this year, the two most important events, and this was exactly 12 years ago, because the Profections come around every 12 years. They're tied to a 12-year cycle. And that's interesting because there's something interesting there with regard to Jupiter. So they're tied to this 12-year cycle. And in 1995, I graduated from UT with my psychology degree that I was talking to you about. And I had to find a job. And this was extremely difficult this year because, essentially I had a degree in liberal arts and psychology, so bachelor's degree. So there's not much you can do with that. So it was a really difficult year for me. The other important event that happened this year was that my husband and I bought our first and only house so far. Okay, so this year we have the ascendant has perfected, and you can do this manually by just counting houses. The first year is always you count 0 for this first year, because your first year you're 0 at birth, and then you turn 1 when you reach the second house cut. So this would be first, second, third, fourth, 5, you go all the way around until you get to your birthday. And on this year, the ascendant had perfected to this house here. Now, you notice that I have these 4 planets here. Now, these are the 4 dignity lords that I was talking about. The domicile lord, Saturn rules Capricorn. The moon is the detriment lord. And Mars is the exaltation. I have the little notation plus, minus, up and down the arrow. So the giver, the taker away, the one who exalts, the one who depresses. Okay? Now, these planets do something to this house. Saturn gives something to the first house. The moon takes away something of the first house. Mars exalts something of the first house. Jupiter brings down something of the first house. Now, whenever the ascendant falls over a natal house, okay, what you get is that something, this is you in the ship, okay? You're navigating through this territory right now. You're navigating through the 6th house. The 6th house is the house of what? Employment, duties, obligations, right? Health, yes, illness. Health is actually, well, I won't go into that. You all know. Okay, so there's a birth of something new, okay? Something new is happening here. It's happening to this terrain, to this topography. This topography is changing. That's the matter. Okay, so there's something changing in my obligations, my duties, my employment. Now, the Time Lords in the natal chart of the 6th house tell you the end result of these changes that are happening. So we have, if we go to the same 4 lords, how they're positioned in the natal. So the first one is Saturn. We have Saturn here in the 8th. Okay? So Saturn in the 8th, we have, now use this grammatical syntax. Okay, verb, object. We have an obligation, a commitment. Actually, commitment is a word, I have default words for all the planets, and commitment is the word that comes up often with Saturn and it works really well. So commitment to an 8th house thing, object. Okay? What is an 8th house object? Yeah, resources of your partner, banks, loans, right? Inheritances. Actually, all of these came out for me this year. All of them. All connected to the same event. So there's a commitment that happens in the 8th house object, right? Commitment to bank, any one of those that you want to choose. Doing this action gives me an obligation, gives me a duty, gives me a 6th house thing. Okay? Now, the moon is here in Virgo, and it's on the sign of the 2nd house, but it's in the position of the 1st house, so there's a combination here, 1st and 2nd. Now, the moon has to do with reception, right? It has to do with receiving, has to do with nurturing, has to do with all that, growth, development. So verbs connected to the moon. Receiving is my default one for the moon. So I would be receiving assets that are connected to the home. 1st, 2nd combination. Receiving assets connected to the home. Now, doing that has an impact on these duties. It diminishes my obligations, right? Receiving these assets connected to the home diminish my obligations. Now, my mother-in-law gave us our down payment for the house. She lives abroad, okay? Ruler of the 12th house. So the giver of something far away, okay, in doing this action diminishes my obligations. Okay? She gave us this chunk of money so we could put down on our house. Now, Mars is here in the 10th, and it's in Taurus. And Mars is going to exalt the 6th house. Okay? Now, one of the words, the default words I use for Mars is break or separation. This is one of the words that, Mars comes up more often as breaking things apart. It's not really just about conflicts. Every time Mars happens doesn't mean you have a fight with someone. It's really about breaking things up. So a break from a status, 10th house things, a public status, an occupation. Every time you know those application forms where you fill out your name, your address, whether you're single or married, what citizenship, all of those things are on a public application. Those are all 10th house things, because often when you move, a 10th house gets affected. The public sees you in a different residence, 10th house. The public sees you as married. The public sees you as divorced. The public sees you as a parent. Changes in personal or public status really come up with the 10th. So here, a break from an occupation, okay, exalts my obligation, okay? It uplifts the 6th house. So I ended school, my occupation broke, and having that happen exalted the need for employment. It exalted the need for me to go out and do something, not to mention the fact that I don't have a house to pay for. Okay? So that break does something to this. Jupiter is going to downgrade. Downgrade is another good word for the fall. So Jupiter is in the 11th, right, connected to the 12th by sign. So we have an affiliation, 12th house, that's removed or far away, right? So support from an affiliation far away, okay, downgrades my obligations. Okay? It's not such a big deal because I've got this help that came in, and so our debt is a little low. Okay? You see these relationships, they're all relating to the 6th house topography. This is what I call alchemy. This is alchemy on the matters of your life. It's this, taking and giving away, and I like to think of Einstein's E equals MC squared. Because energy and matter are always interchanging. Well, this actually shows you, through these rulerships that there's this, yeah.
So every 12 years you have the same pattern repeat?
Yes, every 12 years you have the same pattern repeat. And that's a good question because it doesn't mean it'll always manifest the same way. This is why you look at 4 different charts. Because that's the end result is that it could manifest in this way. But you have these other layers of things going on that are interacting with this chart as well. So the patterns are going to change slightly. But if you think back to these, to the last time where you got the same cycle, you'll see the resemblances. You'll see the form resemblances. The specifics will change because there are different manifestations, because the transits are different, everything else is different. But the essence of it, the essence of the end result will be the same. Okay, so then we translate these time lords and say in the perfected chart. Okay, so here's Saturn. Here's Saturn. Okay, Saturn is in the 8th. The perfected placement is always the same, but it changes with regard to the natal. So here's the 8th over the 1st, and these overlays are important because they tell you something about changes in one area have an impact on this area. Okay, so this commitment to a bank impacts my direction in life. It impacts my physical environment. The first house is, like I said, it's the ship you're in that takes you through your life. So that's why it's your body as well. In the traditional literature, it's your body, but it also comes up as your home, because your home is the next level of the physical environment that surrounds you, that surrounds you as a living being. So making this commitment has an impact on my living environment. Well, yeah, I bought this house, I moved. I had to move from my old living environment to my new living environment. Now, remember, this is over the course of the year. I haven't gotten into timing yet. Okay, so the moon, okay, in this chart, it's at 0 degrees on my birthday. And so receiving these acids from the home, because the placement's the same, changes my obligation to my partner. Because this is my partner's mom who is giving us this money. And there's this, different relationship now. That's, the sense of, well, I'm really tied to this person. I have, all these obligations, and the seventh house is not only partners. Sometimes it has to do with relationships to people who are living with you that are not necessarily your partner. They're usually living relationships of some sort. And she was with us for a while. So this can also have been her. Okay, so you do the same thing with Mars. You read Mars here, because these are the 4 lords here that have some relationship to this house. And you read a break from the public status because it's the same placement natally. It's always in the 10th, but it has this impact on the 3rd house. Okay. Now the 3rd house is what? Your neighborhood, right? It's also documents. The 3rd house comes up a lot with documents because documents are vehicles that convey something that's familiar. The 3rd house is all about the ways in which familiar things are conveyed or spoken about or I don't want to emphasize the Mercury too much, but it is about making something familiar known, whereas the 9th is about making something unfamiliar known, something alien. So the 3rd house comes up with documents because documents are vehicles through which we make things familiar known. Now, so having this break from my, my residency basically changes my documents. I mean, I have a new residence. So that relationship is shown here. And it also changes my neighborhood, obviously. And then Jupiter, you do the same thing. And you see Jupiter's in its own sign. So it is sort of, this is kind of called in grammatical terms a reflexive relationship because it is having, its action is giving to itself. So in grammar, that's called a reflexive verb when I say, I see myself. Well, this is support from an affiliation is, how did I translate it? Support from a removed affiliation has an impact on my property, the 4th house. Okay? So you see this clearly, what I'm talking about? Okay. All right, so let's go now. Stop. Did I do that? Or did you do that? Oh. Yeah, the other one. June, yeah. Okay. So this is, now we're going into timing. Okay, so this is the chart, the one I showed you before was on the birthday. That is a chart you put on your birthday to see what's coming for the year. And that's speaking to you about, in general, about the year. The main event, the main topographical change changing for you for that year. And now we want to see when this change is coming about. Okay? Now I put up the date for when I had the closing for my house. And what I wanted to show you is the key things to look for when you're looking at the changes in the Profections. Now, you're always interested in these 4 planets. These are going to be the ones that are going to tell you something that's changing. Now, when any of these 4 planets change sign, okay, there's a change in topography coming. Now, you see, on the date of my closing, Saturn went into 0 degrees. Right? It came out of Leo, went into 0 degrees Virgo, and tied into the 2nd house through that sign. Okay? It tied the 1st and the 2nd together. And so the banking commitment that I showed you before has its start, has its initiation. That change, that topographical change, the relationship of me to banks and me to the 6th house obligations changes when that Saturn changes sign. And that is what you look for, changes in sign. It's one of the things you look for in the Profections. And because natally, now you know that in directions when you direct things, everything directs at the same time, so the aspect relationships are always the same. And because I have Saturn and Mars at the same degree, the aspect relationship here is the same, so they also pretty much change signs around the same time. So, so when I make this commitment to a bank,
I'm confused. Is this a transitory chart or a professional chart?
this is a perfecting chart.
When you say when it changes signs is when it's important?
Yes.
So when it changes signs every time it moves?
No.
Every 30 days? Or every...
No, it'll be 30 degrees per year. So in the course of the year, it'll go from its natal position through to the same degree of the next
Okay,
sign.
thank you.
Yeah. Good question. So when Mars and Saturn pretty much change degrees at the same, change sign at the same time. Mars is actually a little bit ahead in minutes, so it changed first. This is the time to look for the changes promised here in the birth date. So I would start targeting around this time frame for the delineation I gave for these events, and for this commitment to be made, financial commitment to be made, and for this change in public residence that changes my documents. Well, that's exactly what a closing is. You are changing all your documents and you're making this financial commitment to a bank. It's clearly shown here in this timing of this 0 degree change. Okay, so now the other thing you look for, aside from the change in signs, is you look for any aspects of one of these 3 planets to something natally. Now this gets into inner chart aspects. This is not how the Hellenistic system works this. They work it differently, but this is what I've been able to deduce from working the charts phenomenologically. So Jupiter was making a square to the moon. Okay, and I always use partile aspects. You don't have to use any orbs. This is the best way to do it. It's the best way to narrow it down because you can get precise with what else is happening and to see specifics about timing. So I use partile aspects, meaning the same degree. I don't care about minutes, but as long as it enters the same degree, I'm counting it from there. So Jupiter has entered the same degree. It actually entered a little bit earlier, but it's pretty close even in minutes. This is 33, this is 39. And actually, the difference in minutes I can tell you, because this Jupiter refers to what? This aid from an affiliation. Well, the money was actually sent to us back maybe a week or 2, which is around the right amount of time for the minute change. It was sent to us a couple of, maybe a week or 2 before this aspect took place. So this support from this affiliation that I showed you before related to my mother-in-law, allowed us to receive these aspects connected to the home. Okay, so that's the other thing you look for. You look for any one of these planets making aspects to the natal chart. So when you have these 2 things happening, you know you're pretty close to the right date. You can target when this first comes into aspect. And then you use the transits to narrow it down further, because you can get by minute when it actually enters 6 degrees will be, and when this one enters 0 will be a few weeks earlier. So you start looking there, and then the transits will narrow it down even farther. Okay. So the other thing I wanted you to know that's kind of interesting is the rulership of the moon to the natal 6, okay, decreases the obligations given by commitment to the bank, right? So the moon decreases these obligations given. But what it also does, because what does the moon exalt? Anybody know their rulership? Taurus, right. The moon exalts Taurus. So the moon also has a relationship to the 10th, right? We're just looking at the ascendant house. But the moon also has a relationship to the 10th house. It exalts the 10th house of status, right? I never owned a house. Now I'm a homeowner. That's a more exalted status. Okay? So the moon, while it's diminishing its obligations, it's exalting the 10th house. You see how, you read about in medieval literature how falls are bad and how detriments are bad, everything's bad. You see these things working the way they're supposed to work in a very positive event. Okay? So you do need things to be taken away, even in positive events. You do need things to be brought down because there's an exchange of matter going on. There are changes in energy. It's alchemy. It's house alchemy. That's what I should call this method, my house alchemy method. So you see that. Okay, so the moon also exalts the 10. Now the last chart I want to show you, and we're doing really well in time. Moses would be so proud.
Now, why did you focus on the moon? I know it exalts the 10 because it exalts in Taurus, but what was particular about that year for the moon?
Because Jupiter had just aspected the moon to the perfection. So I wanted to look at what the moon was doing in relation to the other aspects. Over here. Oh, yeah.
Are there some years where you have certain perfected rising signs where you don't wind up with 4 lords because nothing is
Yes.
exalted in that sign?
Yes.
And then you're only looking at your 2
Yes,
lords.
then you're only looking at 2. Right. Sometimes you get 3, sometimes you get 2, sometimes you get 4. Okay. Is that the last chart? Okay. So now I've got, it's kind of confusing. I've got the 3 charts on there. The natal's in the middle. The perfections are on the outside. We've already looked at those. Now we've got the transits on the last wheel. And so the Time Lord transits. So we know that the perfected Jupiter had activated the natal moon. So whatever is being activated natally, those are the planets you're going to look at in the transits. Okay? Those are the ones you're going to look at doing something in the transits. Now, we know that the moon, makes transits everything in your chart in 30 days, right? So normally, nothing happens with the moon. You've got a gazillion transits of the moon all the time. Nothing's going on, but they're not being sort of raised up in a pedestal. That's how the Hellenistic literature mentions it. They're not being raised up in a pedestal through the perfections all the time. So when you've got this perfection activating this moon, I've already narrowed it down in terms of timing by these changes, right? The Saturn, Mars, Jupiter aspects of the moon. I've narrowed down this within a couple, maybe a week or so. And now I'm going to look at what aspects the moon is making after this takes place. And what I note here is that the moon has come to a square to the natal ascendant. Now, what I said about the ascendant, everything comes into birth through an ascendant. So you want something aspecting your natal ascendant. It's really important. This is how something symbolic gets turned back to the natal through that ascendant, right? So this moon here, it just on the day of my closing had reached partile square with the ascendant. Now squares are not bad. Squares are a dynamic energy. Squares from good planets can be very good. And the transits here are triggers to everything else that we already talked about. So the transit by itself doesn't do anything. It only triggers something bigger that's already promised there, that's unfolding. Okay, so these are kind of like, in Aristotle's scheme, I would, like the rain that makes you open your umbrella, the rain that, soaks your shoes, that, soaks your clothing. This is like the rain. Here's the moon making a square. What else does it do? It opposes, here, the part of fortune in the 4th house. Now, without, going too much into the part of fortune, because I don't have that much time, so I'll make it quick. Part of fortune is really interesting. I was just talking with a friend of mine about it. And the part of fortune, I'm sorry to say, I love Robert Soler, but there are no good books on the part of fortune. I love Robert Soler's work, and I think what he wrote is really important, but it wasn't enough. I still didn't get a good sense of the part of fortune. There's definitely something related to the part of fortune that has to do with manifestation. Sometimes it's good manifestation, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's manifestation that's not so good. And when I've worked with part of fortune in the perfections, that's usually how it shows up. It shows up as something you know it's coming. And you have to go back to what is calculated in these parts. haven't done the amount of research yet that I want to with parts, and the parts are, a whole different, I could spend months working on the parts. But just this part of fortune, it does relate to something that's been, it's sort of like the genie in the bottle. It's something that can really deliver something great that you've been wanting to manifest, that you've been wishing and hoping for, or it could be something that you've been dreading manifesting, because it is constructed from the lights, the point of will, which is the sun, volition, and the moon, which is the reception of that volition, projected from the matter, which is the ascendant. Okay? So it is a point of manifestation of something that is willed and desired or feared. It's definitely conscious. So in my case, it is tied to the fourth house. And the one who gives is Mars. Mars breaks from a public status. Okay, we saw how Mars was related to this house. It gives a fourth house thing. It gave me the property, so it manifested for me this part of fortune. And the moon just clicked right into that and made it, triggered everything else. So you see how they're all interconnected, these transits, the perfections. And I didn't even touch on the solar return. That's another piece of the puzzle, which we don't have time to go into. But I think I'll leave it at that. Your brains must be jumping out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Maria, since the perfected chart is cast from the year, why couldn't you use the subsequent 1 month? Because you got 12 houses to cover
Yes.
the year. Why couldn't you use a month from each,
You do.
per time?
Yes, and that gets into monthly perfections. The same way you count around the circle to the year, you also count around to the month, and you can count around to the hour, and you can count around to the minute. You do it exactly the same way. And it always starts from the place where you left off. So you would count around the month here, where you started in May of my birthday. This would be 1995 May, then this would be June, September. And these monthlies, oh man, I've used them and they're awesome.
Where would you start the day? From the same place?
Yeah, you started from the cusp.
So you make 2.5 revolutions per month on the day.
Say that again?
You make 2.5 revolutions per month if you were using it, perfecting by daily.
Yeah, that's probably, I haven't done the dailies, but that sounds about right.
12
No.
times 2.5 is 30.
Yeah.
2.5 days per sign.
Yeah, Kurt, you might know this better. I haven't worked with the,
Well,
with the
Dale
dailies.
uses a version of perfection that is 1 sign per day.
1 sign per day.
Yeah.
Valens does. Yeah, Valens does it that way. 2.5 for Ptolemy. Yeah, there are variations on the dailies. I've only worked with the monthlies, and the monthlies I can attest to empirically that they're really interesting. But the dailies I haven't really tested out. But yeah, there are different methods for them. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
I'm a little confused when you do 30 degrees or 1 sign per year. With the moon, why that changed 2 degrees
Here?
from the 6 degrees to the 8 degrees?
Right. Because this day is June 23rd, which is only a few weeks after my birthday. So,
On the first chart, is that why? Because
yeah, the first shot was on my birthday. Right.
You're using the same time as your birthday, but a different date?
Right. And what I'm showing you is, I'm working backwards from an event I already knew and trying to show you how you would time if you didn't know. So if you didn't know, you would start with your birthday. And then you would advance the chart and look for any changes in sign of these 4 lords. And then you would stop when it changes. And so the change in sign came around June 23rd for Saturn and Mars, so that's where it stopped. So everything stopped at that point, and the moon happened to be at 8 degrees when it stops.
8 degrees, and that was within the 30.
Yes. Yes, it would go in the year, it starts on your degree of your birth, so 6 degrees. It would have started 6 degrees Aquarius and go to 6 degrees Pisces. So it would span. Right. Okay, no questions, and we're just out of time. So.